Get started. Happy snow day. Um, so, what to say? We looked at the syllabus last time, and one thing that pops out is we got something to do today, right? What do we got to do today?
Our second forum.
Yeah, forum post. So here's your question. I know you've all been thinking about it a lot, but just in case you haven't yet, what is the role of religion in the creation of caste? And so that requires you to have a sense of what caste is, and we've been talking about that this week. So we can continue that question in a moment. It's sort of a complicated question. What is caste? And then even more complicated is where does religion come in? So not an easy question, but hopefully one you guys are up for the challenge. Do you feel like you're able to answer this question now? Ooh, a telling silence. So maybe not, but okay, that's fine. We got an hour to figure it out. We got even longer than an hour. How long do we got? We got till 12 or 1:20, right? So we've got an hour and 15 minutes to figure this out. So we listened to the podcast. Did anybody go for a walk and listen to the podcast like I recommended? Also, a telling silence. Come on, guys. You got to go for walks and listen to podcasts. I went for a walk this morning. Actually, not quite this morning. Well, I guess, yeah, it was this morning, and listened to the podcast. It was snowing, and so not the greatest time to take a walk. So I assume that's why you all did not want to go for a walk and listen to the podcast because it's snowing outside. But, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't slippery or anything. It was actually pretty easy to walk on compared to like when it's all icy and horrible. So, anyways, if you haven't listened to the podcast yet, there's still time, but not a lot of time. It's very short. It's very easy. It's only 20 minutes. So please do listen to it. I'm asking you to use this podcast in your response. So please cite Wilkerson and the Sacred and Profane podcast. So Wilkerson talks a lot about caste, not as much about religion. Podcast talks more about religion, not as much about caste. So you can put them together, write a little piece. So any questions about this right now off the bat? Are you guys clear at the very least on what I'm asking you to do?
When we're citing the podcast, do we have to I know you sent a transcript. Should we just reference the name of the person next to the quote, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. With books, it's a little more straightforward. I think I told you this last time, but you can just do like Wilkerson, page 100, right? Something like that. You got your quote, Wilkerson, page 100. And so now with the podcast, how do we cite this? So what you could do is just like you were saying, you could say Jelaine Schmidt, right? So she's one of the characters. I've got the transcript open right here. Schmidt. And then you could even say the time if you want to get really ambitious, right? You could do 000039 to show that it's 39 seconds in. But even that, I'm not going to be really strict about. So yeah, I think if you write the name of the person, you could write the Sacred and Profane podcast, you could write the page of the PDF. The main goal is to just say where your quote is coming from. And because it's pretty loose, I think when I quote it here, I just wrote Sacred and Profane. You do something like that, that would also be fine, right? So just give me a sense of where the quote is coming from. If I want to look it up, I can just open up the transcript and search for it, and then I'll be able to find it. This is due tonight. Yes, tonight at midnight. So tonight before midnight, right? So it closes at 11:59 p.m. It's kind of an arbitrary time. I picked it because I don't want to ruin your Friday night and make it due at midnight tomorrow night. So I made it due at midnight tonight. If you absolutely are busy and can't do it today, tomorrow is also fine. I think it remains open until midnight tomorrow, but I will know if it's late, and I will not penalize you if it's late. But if you don't get it in by midnight tomorrow, then I'm going to email you and I'm going to say, hey, where the hell is your forum post? And then I'll say, if you don't turn it in, you'll get a 0. And if some of you have learned, time goes by and then you forget about it and then you have a 0. And so zeros will really destroy your grade. You know, this is a kind of a give me assignment. You just do it and you'll get a good grade. Like I very rarely give less than 8 out of 10. But that being said, if you don't do it, you get a 0, and then that's a huge gap in your final grade. So if you care about grades, obviously do the assignment. And yes, it is due tonight. But let me know if you can't get it done. Any other questions?
No.
Again, here is the prompt. So let me know if other questions show up. So one thing is, why Caste in the first place, right? So this is sort of a weird place to start because most of Wilkerson is talking about how bad Caste is and all the problems with Caste. And, you know, obviously I assigned that reading. I agree with her assessment. I think she's really quite lucid and illuminating in her analysis. But I think an interesting place to start is this, again, double vision, right? We can be sort of the outsider critic or the insider proponent. Robert E. Lee, I would argue, is a proponent of a caste system, even though he wouldn't call it that. And so we can try to think, why have it in the first place, right? So maybe one thing we can think about, I guess, first of all, we can just have, why have caste, question mark. And if you have thoughts on that, I'd like to hear it. But more specifically, how does it help organize society, right? What does caste do to help organize society and give order? And is there a place for maybe compassion or care? Can that fit into the caste system? Maybe duty, right? This idea of duty. We haven't really talked about this very much yet, but we will as we keep going over the next couple weeks. Duty is actually going to become a major word we talk about starting next week. And so where does duty come in, right? What does this idea of duty have to do with caste? Yeah, and so this idea of care sort of fits into it. So what do you guys think? Caste, order, right? Organization in society, duty, care, or compassion. What does caste do for society? We're not going to do any breakout groups right now. We could do some later. Let's see how the timing goes. But I just want to kind of get the ball rolling and hear what you think. Why have a caste system at all?
Maybe it puts people in like the different like categories.
Okay, the different categories. What kinds of categories are you thinking about, Harrison?
Like maybe like like the lower caste, like peasants, and then it goes up to people like basic like workers and like scholars and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. So if we think about the beginning of time, right, then maybe everybody is the same. You've got all the same kinds of people. Maybe we're all cavemen or something like that, right? And then time goes, this is all, of course, imaginary, but let's just do sort of a thought exercise. Time goes by, eventually, some people are better at some things than others, right? So maybe I'm better at like digging holes, and so my job is to dig holes. And you know, Harrison is better at planting seeds or something like that, so he plants the seeds. And so we all of a sudden start to have different jobs, different organization inside.
But I don't think that works with caste because like the highest level of caste, don't they do like mostly bureaucratic work, like passing laws and stuff? Anyone with the right education can really do that.
Well, so Isa is bringing up a good point. I guess first of all, we'll have to think about which society are we talking about here. So, what is the highest caste in ancient India?
Brahms,
Brahmin. So they're not really bureaucrats. They are priests, right? They communicate with the gods. And so, but I think your second point still holds, right? Is education, right? What is the role of education in the creation of a caste system? And Isa is arguing that anybody who gets the proper education could do the role of a Brahmin. And I agree with her, right? I heard somebody give a talk once and say something to the effect of like, talent is universal, opportunity is limited, or something like that, right? I think there's some truth to it, right? If you educate and develop and what to say, nurture somebody, they can basically do whatever you need them to do, right? As long as you give them the tools to do it. So I agree with her. I think education is definitely a huge part of this. When the caste system develops, it's not only identifying what is sort of a natural ability and then augmenting that as much as pushing people toward these different sectors of society. So that's very good. Another thing, just to finish the thought that Harrison got us started on, is if we think about organized society, it does become very bureaucratic, right? It does become like, I'm a professor, and I'm not only a professor, I specialize in religious studies, and I specialize in very specifically Asian religions. I've got my very niche ability, whereas some of my colleagues do other things. You've got doctors of the foot, doctors of the eye, doctors of the teeth, doctors of this, doctors of that, right? Very few doctors specialize on the entire body even. And so I think as time goes by, we become more and more and more specialized. And so there is this certain degree of organization that comes with caste. You guys see what I'm saying here? This idea of order, organization, even duty, right? This idea of duty. So what?
Yeah.
Let's think about that word. Are you guys familiar with the idea of duty? What does duty mean?
It's like I would think it's like doing your like doing the job that you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and who decides what you're supposed to do? Again, just like Isa was saying, a lot of it comes down to society, right? Society says this is your duty, this is the duty of a man, this is the duty of a woman. I think these are kind of old, traditional, maybe patriarchal roles that have been handed down, and now people are just beginning to challenge these things. Not to say they haven't been challenged before, but there still is a sense of social duty that people are kind of struggling with now. And we're thinking about what are our duties exactly. So duties are very much a part of the caste system too. Yaya says responsibility, exactly. So again, we're going to talk more about duty in the future, but this is something we can think about too. How about this last point? Does care come into place at all? Is that a part of the caste system?
I didn't see much care. Well, I think that the example of I think the man kissing the other man's foot as like humility.
Okay. Well, I don't think he's quite kissing it, right? He's touching it. But yes, there was this sort of this show of humility for sure. And so could you connect the dots for us? How is that a moment of care? What implies care there? I agree with you, but can you spell it out for us?
I mean, it's a like a care of the society that he's in, or like the culture, the group of people that he's in, because he's showing, I wouldn't say like affection exactly, but it's like he cares about the people that he's with.
Okay, so let's fill in the blanks a little bit. So we had a king who wanted to have a child. He couldn't have a child, so he went to visit a Brahmin, right? We could call him a sage. It wasn't even just any old Brahmin. It was this very special guy. He had to sort of go out in the woods to go find him, that kind of thing. He finds the sage. He touches the sage's foot. And so who is caring for whom here? Where does the care come into play between the king who wants to have a child and then the sage who's going to help him do this ritual? Who is caring for whom here?
Man is taking care of the child.
Well, the child's not there. I guess I'll maybe the scene wasn't totally clear from the clip that we watched, but the king needed something, right? Usually it's the king taking care of everybody, but here's this moment where he's kind of humble. He's showing his helplessness, right? How he can't help himself. And so he goes to this religious practitioner. He says, I need your help. Can you please help me? And the religious practitioner says, yes. And remember, he had the big eyes and they were tearing up. He was really touched by it. And of course, did the religious practitioner help him?
Yes.
Yes, he did. He came through, he helped him out. called on the gods came down, gave him the special sauce, and then he was able to get what he wanted, right? So here is a moment, I like Simone's thought here, it is a moment of care, where somebody who is lower in the hierarchy says, I am lower than you, I need your help. And the person who's higher in the hierarchy, because this is a hierarchy built on purity, right? And really divinity, being close to the gods, the person can evoke the gods to care for the lower person, right? This is how the caste system is sort of supposed to work, right? Is the higher up people take care of the lower down people. Now, an important question, we can kind of move away from the supposed to work vision and go to the outside and say, is that how it always works? Is caste always a system of care?
No. Sometimes it's a system of oppression.
It is often a system of oppression, right? So here is the tension that I wanted to just bring attention to, is that on the one hand, it could be a system of care, right? In a patriarchy, a father really can care for a family or a wife, just like we saw before. But as we also saw before in Tevye the Dairyman and beyond, fathers and husbands can exploit their families and traumatize them and do all sorts of horrible things, right? So whereas maybe in an ideal world, these are systems of care, ideal worlds don't always work out, right? So here's an example of this kind of voice. It's from the podcast. And so again, I encourage you to listen to it if you haven't yet. Robert E. Lee, have you guys heard of him before?
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, why is he so famous?
Oh wait, is it the? Wait, it's not the one who's on the Confederate, right?
It is the one who's on the
Oh, it is?
Confederacy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh well, he was like wasn't he like a general for the Confederacy, and he was just like he was just like based on like slavery, and like he like wanted it like so badly. It was like weird.
It is kind of weird. Yeah. And so people look back at him and think, yeah, he was just a soldier in the army and he grew up in Virginia and that's where his house was. And he was sort of defending the Southern way of life. Maybe you've driven on a street named after him. Have you ever been on Lee Highway before? I can't tell you how many Lee Highways there are in Virginia because maybe I've told you this, but I grew up in Virginia, right? So this is kind of my hometown. And so Lee Highway is in every part of Virginia. I don't know about New York, probably not as many Lee Highways up here, but let me tell you, lots of Lee Highways in Virginia, lots of schools, many things are named after this man, many statues of this man. Again, we started the class with a statue of him. Here he is in downtown Charlottesville. That's where I went to school. The podcast is made by the University of Virginia. Just so in case it's not clear, that is where I went to school. You'll hear the voice of people who taught me in religious studies from the religious studies department there, my teachers and colleagues and friends. So this is a story that I know very well, which is one reason why I want to teach it to you guys. So a lot of people, particularly in the South, Confederate flags in Virginia, which surprised me. Yeah, well, I could say the same thing, Joseph. I've seen Confederate flags in New York, which surprised me. You go upstate and you never know what you might find around here. So yeah, but we're going to get into that too. But people kind of defend him as this like noble soldier who just got on the wrong side of history. But I wanted to be very clear. He supported slavery and he supported white supremacy, but he supported it in a way that seems kind of noble, right? So here's what he said: based on wisdom and Christian principles, you do a gross wrong and injustice to the whole Negro race in setting them free. And, forgive me for using this language, but this is, a historical quote. As we talked about last time, don't use this word, but of course, Lee is using it because he was a white supremacist. And it is only this consideration that has led to the wisdom, intelligence, and Christianity of the South to support and defend the institution up to this time. So what is he saying? What is his point in this quotation? Why do we do an injustice to the whole Black race in setting them free? Why would he ever say that? How could setting somebody free be an injustice?
He's trying to come off as someone who it's like oh, I'm taking care of them. Like I am, you know, giving them, I don't know, whatever it is that, like, I'm taking care of them because since they're mine, you know, kind of like the way that they would talk about, like, I don't know, like a farmer would talk about his cows, or, you know, like, oh, I'm taking care of them, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
end, it's like this thing of ownership. You know, it would be bad for them. It wouldn't be good because in the end, I'm taking care of them. You know, like I'm uh giving them a space. You know.
Mhm. Yeah. And we touched on this before, right? There's almost a sense of love here, right? He's like, I love my slaves. I love them. And so I'm going to take care of them. But to return to Maya Angelou, love does not bind, right? And of course, slavery is bondage in a very literal sense of that term. This is not a liberating sort of love here. And so that is why we spend so much time on love, because a lot can fall under love, including enslavement can fall under the category of love here. And so it's very slippery, this, the way he's arguing about this. It's like a father and the family, a shepherd and the flock, just like Simone was saying. It's like a farmer taking care of his land, his crops, his creatures, whatever. And so he's basically saying setting Black people free, making them not slaves, right, is bad for them. Now, this is a twisted logic that only makes sense under the context of white supremacy, right? This idea that white people are better than Black people. And so it just goes to show how twisted society was at this point in time.
It's just kind of like that it would be inconvenient for them.
It would be convenient for who?
Inconvenient for them. Like
Oh,
it wouldn't benefit them to be free.
Yeah, it's basically it's treating Black people as if they were some entirely other species, right, that are unable to care for themselves, which of course is utterly untrue, utterly not the case. So Charlottesville, in 2017, there was the Unite the Right rally. Did you guys hear about this?
Yeah.
What do you remember about it?
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about what sort of news you guys are aware of. So what do you know about Unite the Right rally?
A bunch of white supremacists basically wanted to unite all other white supremacists in their regions so they could start their race war.
Yeah.
Of which I would have been a victim of. So yes.
Yeah, exactly. So a frightening moment, right? And a surprising one too. I was in Charlottesville right before this. So I graduated that same year, 2017. I just got a new job and left town that summer. But one thing a lot of people don't know is even that summer, around June or July, there was kind of like a dress rehearsal where a bunch of members of the Ku Klux Klan came to Charlottesville. And there were a lot of police, a lot of counter protesting. I was there. I saw it happen. A lot of anger, a lot of just strange emotions flying. By the end, there was tear gas and, again, military escorts of the Ku Klux Klan people as they leave Charlottesville. It was a bizarre scene. And when I had heard that there was going to be kind of a bigger version of that at the end of the summer, I was like, this is going to end badly. And of course, it did end badly. We're going to go into it. But really what was at the core of this is this statue of Robert E. Lee. It was this guy that we were just talking about, Robert E. Lee, that, again, from kind of an insider perspective, people see him as this noble soldier of a lost cause of the South, right, of the Confederacy. But from an outsider perspective, he was a slave owner, he was racist, he was a white supremacist, no question, right? I mean, it's very clear from this statement here and from the way he lived his life. And so when people came out in support of him, it became very clear who those people were and what they supported, right? We see the Confederate flags, like Joseph brought up a moment ago. Here they are. We see Nazi flags, right? So it's like any question that, like, somehow the Confederacy is this noble cause that is not dripping with white supremacy is just totally lost when you got the Nazi flag next to the Confederate flag. Gadsden flag is this "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Have you guys seen that one before? Don't tread on me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Awful.
that one is a little less, what to say, utterly white supremacist. I think that there's a little bit more of like a states' right vibe to this one. I think it was from a cartoon that Benjamin Franklin made in the colonial days. But as you can see, these things are mixing together in a meaningful way here. And I would not draw a major distinction between any of them. Again, it went on for 2 days. So this is the 12th. This is the night of the 11th. This crowd of angry, mostly white people, maybe there were some non-white people, but mostly white people, and mostly white men for that matter, as far as you can tell. I think that's a woman here. They were carrying tiki torches. This was at the University of Virginia. This was at my school, right? And it's just like, how did this happen? How did like the police not come and shoot them with fire hoses or something, right? This is like a fire hazard. And so they were chanting.
The police were there.
Say it again.
That some of the police were part of the crowd.
Right. Well, as we saw on January 6th, that is part of the problem, right? Is the lines between the police and the members of these crowds are not always so clear, although they are clear in some cases. So I don't mean to throw all the police under the bus, but it's true. There is a very clear connection between police, military, and these types of crowds. I hate to put it that way, but that is what was proven to us on January 6th of this year. And so, yeah, these crowds were saying, you will not replace us. Jews will not replace us, because you and Jews sound very similar. And so they're going and walking through Charlottesville chanting this, you will not replace us. And then they started saying, Jews will not replace us. So this isn't just anti-Black. It's not just white supremacy. It's also anti-Semitic, right? So it's anti-Jewish. And so when you think about this chant, it's interesting, again, to step into this mind, to think, why would these people feel like they're being replaced? And maybe that's an open question. What do you guys think? Why are the white supremacists feeling like they are being replaced?
I think more people have come to the United States or North America in general, immigrants, because they want to. I mean, I think everywhere in the world, and I think it probably has happened for longer than that. Like, I don't think it's just recent that more people have immigrated here, but I think that white people might be kind of, they don't like seeing other people that aren't their same race have the same opportunities as them, and they kind of take it as a replacement, like, oh, you know, all the immigrants are taking our jobs. And it's like, maybe it's not that immigrants are necessarily taking your jobs, maybe you're not good enough for the job, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so it's this idea of like, oh, they're replacing us, or oh, you know, they're coming in, and it's like there's enough space, like geographical space, physical space for other people to come in, but you feel threatened, not because you'll be replaced. You won't be replaced. It's not like there's a spot for you, you know?
Yeah.
You're just intimidated by the fact that other people who are not your same race or who are not like you are going to get the same opportunities, you know? Or even better opportunities.
What you're bringing up reminds me of this class versus caste distinction, right? So in a caste system, the people who are at the top, for example, the Brahmins, or in this case, white men more specifically, were promised something, right? It's because you're a Brahmin, you will be at the top. Because you're a white man, you will be at the top. You will own things and people, and things and people will not own you, right? That is the way the system was created. But under a class-based system, that's not necessarily the case, right? You guys remember, what's the difference between class and caste?
One is based off of money, that's class, and anyone, as long as you accumulate enough money, you can move up and down the ladder. Caste is your birth rate. So it's just whatever circumstances you're born to, and there's no moving up or down.
Excellent. Yeah. And so this is something, I might have even copied this in the chat last time. I think it's pretty good. If you can act your way out of it, then it's class, not caste. And I think this is what Simone is highlighting, is that we are at least striving toward a class-based system here in America. That's sort of the American dream, right? That's what America was founded on in some capacity, is that you will have opportunities here. And if you are talented, if you are skilled, if you are capable, then you will climb the ladder, right? And as people have climbed the ladder, and I think, I'm not an expert of these things, but if I'm correctly informed on statistics, actually what's really taken jobs away from white men, it's not really been immigrants as much as women. It's the fact that women are working more. I think that has really created more competition in the work world. So even though this is not an explicitly anti-woman protest, I think that probably is actually a more active cause than the influx of immigrants. Because as Simone was saying, this is something that's been happening for the entire history of America. And honestly, without immigrants coming to America, we will fall apart very quickly. Okay, and as we can see here, the next day, we've got whatever this is called, mace or pepper spray or whatever it is, people hitting each other with flags, hitting each other with sticks. There are even worse pictures in this, but I'm not trying to horrify anybody. This just gives you a sense of how violent things were. The kind of smaller version of the protest that I went to was filled with cops. For whatever reason, again, the cops were not as present here, and so some chaos broke out. The biggest chaos was this guy, James Alex Fields Jr., drove his car into this crowd of people. I think this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and you can see why. This guy's sort of in the way, but look at these upside down people. Look at the sideways dude. Somebody lost their shoes, right? I don't know who the shoeless person is. I can't even see, right? But people are getting plowed over here. Here's some bare feet. Maybe that person lost their shoes, right? This is a crazy moment being captured on camera. And maybe you already know this, but one person lost her life as a result of this car. So one person was killed and 19 were injured. And James Alex Fields Jr. was sentenced to life in prison. So he is still in prison and will probably be in prison for a very long time for this moment of driving his car into the crowd of counter protesters. One thing I want to emphasize is this is not the only statue in Charlottesville. Again, listen to the podcast and you'll hear about another one, which is this one, the Johnny Reb statue. It's been there since 1909. And there are others too. There's Stonewall Jackson, and there's another one in a cemetery, which again, I went to that school. I've seen that cemetery, right? Even though it's sort of hidden, it was near the student dorms. And so I remember wandering around back there and finding this Confederate cemetery back behind the dorms. So yeah, we already covered all this information. Unite the Right rally attempts to unify American white nationalist movements in order to oppose the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue, which still stands in Charlottesville. It's still there. The courts got involved, and I think it's still caught up in the courts about what to do about this Robert E. Lee statue. I guess one thing to think about is, why did people want to remove it? I guess maybe a better way to put it is, how is it an idol of white supremacy? Are you guys familiar with this term, idol? What is an idol?
It's like something you look up to, something like you worship.
Okay, something you look up to or worship. Simone, what do you say?
I said representative.
Representative. Okay, yeah. So something that resents something, something you look up, something you worship. The episode we listened to was called American Idols, right? Which is, of course, a TV show. American Idol. You guys seen this before? Is that even on the air anymore? It was a TV show at some point. You can say somebody is your idol, which means you respect them. That's one definition. That's not what we're talking about here. This is just like Simone and Harrison were saying. It refers to an image that is used as an object of worship, right? It's basically like a statue or a picture of a god or something holy that people then use to worship. And now, of course, white supremacy, you probably already know that one. It's thinking that white people are supreme, the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society. So if we put this together, an idol of white supremacy it's actually a pretty powerful religious idea that this is an idol of white supremacy. Because what this is saying is that people are worshiping white supremacy through these images. You see what I'm saying here? And of course, if you know your 10 commandments, you will know that the second commandment is thou shalt have no other gods before me. It's a commandment against idolatry. So why is Christianity against idolatry? At least in some capacity. So again, idolatry would just be the worship of images, right? The worship of statues and that sort of thing. Why is that a problem for not just Christianity, right? So the 10 Commandments, that's Old Testament. So that's really Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all of these people of the book, right? These Judeo-Christian, all of these religions have problems with idolatry. What's the problem with idolatry?
That people are not then seen as same, like as equals.
Well, so that would be a problem with white supremacy, and I agree with you there. There are a lot of reasons to have problems with white supremacy, but idolatry specifically, why should we not worship idols?
Because for some religions, there's only one God.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Yeah. So the first commandment is that I am God, right? And I'm the only God. So the second commandment is don't worship any other God other than me. And so to worship something like this, now, a white supremacist would probably say, I don't worship that statue. But when you make a statue and put it in front of the courthouse, right, that is at least some form of worship. And again, listen to the podcast, you'll see that there's an entire ceremony, entire ritual, symbolism, right? You can see this Confederate flag is a cross. That's not like a coincidence, right? That's something that whoever designed this statue had in mind. This is a Christian monument, right? Going back to those Christian values that Robert E. Lee was spouting off earlier. So there's a sense that this is a part of Christianity, but using this idea of idolatry, rejecting idolatry, and saying that Johnny Reb, the random Confederate soldier, or Robert E. Lee, these figures who are effectively representatives of white supremacy, those are very easily rejected according to Christian principles by saying this is not God and should not be representing any sort of thing that people should be worshiping, right? This is in fact contrary to God's mission. So to call it an idol of white supremacy is, from a Christian standpoint, rejecting these statues and what they represent. Again, listen to the podcast. So here is Johnny Reb being taken down. So just a few months ago, I guess getting to be sort of a long time ago now, but less than a year ago, this statue was taken down. And I haven't been back since then, so I don't know what it looks like, but I imagine this whole thing was just dismantled sort of quietly overnight. And the same sort of phenomenon is happening all over the South, maybe all over the country, but particularly in Virginia. In Richmond, a lot of statues have been taken down. A statue of Robert E. Lee has been taken down. So there is some movement, although this one that, caused the death, I believe her name was Heather Heyer, something like this, the death of a young woman, this one is still standing. This one is still there. So we'll see how long it takes for that idol of white supremacy to come down. So, okay, any questions so far? I've been talking a lot. How does all of this sound? You feel good about the idea that these are idols of white supremacy?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Does it make sense? Okay, good. And again, if it doesn't, the podcast is there to help. Why don't we transition back into Caste now? Because we haven't talked that much about Caste yet. We haven't really finished with Caste. These are the same questions we saw last time. We could do two things. We still have about a half hour of class left, a little bit more. We could break out into groups and talk about this some more. I feel like there's a lot we could do with these 4 pillars of Caste, or we can discuss them together. What would you guys prefer? Because again, I don't want to put you in these rooms and then you have nothing to talk about. But I also do want to give you a chance to talk about what you're going to write about tonight. So which would you prefer? What do you guys want to do?
Could we
Put
just
them
discuss
together?
it as a class, because sometimes in the groups we stay shut for a while
Yeah.
because we like run out of things to say after we've discussed the topic.
You guys run out of things to say. How is that possible?
I know it's pretty hard.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Sometimes I show up in a breakout room and it's like cameras off, everybody's mute, everybody's just silently sitting in this room together as if, you know, it's such torture to have, you know, the chance to talk to each other. But yeah, I can understand that. So, all right, why don't I shut up then and let you guys talk? We've already talked about caste versus class. That should be pretty familiar. What about this question of race? Why doesn't Wilkerson talk more about race and racism? How is that different from class? What do you guys think? Or from caste, I should say.
I think that was a question that you had put in the Word doc that you wanted us to talk about last class.
Yeah.
And I was pretty stuck on it. So I would like some more clarification on that, because I personally was confused as to why she didn't mention race as much as she did caste.
Yeah.
But that's just my concern with that.
It's a great question, yeah, and I'm glad you were thinking about it. So one thing you could do is open up those Word documents from last time. Again, I could give you the link again, but I think you've already got it. If you don't, then you can just make new notes, because the questions are pretty similar to these. I condensed them down into smaller format, but the ideas are pretty much the same. So what did people come up with? We ran out of time last time, so we can kind of pick up where we left off here. Does anybody have an answer to that question? Why not talk about race?
It's just
Oh,
like
go ahead, Dorian.
I think that castes are based on races. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the book, they are telling that it's pretty the same thing, and like white people are above black people. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it says in the book. And yeah, I feel like for me, caste, race are part of the caste, I think.
Okay, so Dorian is saying they're actually very similar, right? That the caste system that Wilkerson described is based on race, and I think he's absolutely right. So it begs the question, though, then what's the difference, right? Why talk about one thing versus the other? And just so we're clear, because this might not be totally clear, is this word caste is weird to be using it in an American setting, right? It's very natural to use it in an Indian setting. People talk about the caste system in India all the time. It's very weird to be using it in America. And so again, this is an important question, is why does she do it? Why does she do caste instead of race? Does anybody else have thoughts on that? What does the word caste do that the word race does not, or vice versa? What does race do that the word caste does not? How are those different?
I feel like race, you can easily like use it by like differentiating someone who's like light skin, white, or like someone who's dark skin and black. And I feel like in a caste system, you can't really tell one's race, because I feel like we kind of touched on it last time too, because like everyone, just by looking at someone, you wouldn't be able to tell what caste they're in, like if they're a Brahmin or if they're the lowest one. So I feel like that's what race and caste kind of have in, like that's a difference, but I'm not really, again, too sure like on their similarity and their differences so much.
Yeah, I like that. It's so race is obvious, it's visible, it's based on obvious traits, things that you can see, right? Skin color for sure, but also hair, facial characteristics, right? And if you take this even further, you end up with eugenics. Have you guys heard of eugenics before? It's basically race science. And so if you haven't heard of it before, you can look it up. People don't really teach it or even talk about it. it kind of disappeared along with World War II. People began to realize, oh wait, eugenics was an abomination. But it's the same thought process that Yaya was just describing, is judging people based on the way they look. Maybe I can bring in some slides with it. So here is a slide that kind of demonstrates the thought process of eugenics. Can you guys read this map? So it says pigmentation of hair and eyes. This sort of light dotted color is light and mixed predominant. The lighter lines are light and mixed more than dark. The kind of middle gray color is nearly even. The darker gray color is dark more than light and mixed, and then dark predominant. So what is this? First of all, what is this a map of, and what is this map demonstrating or trying to demonstrate?
The map's like Europe, right?
Yeah, it is Europe. Here's the
And then-
Mediterranean Sea, so there's also North Africa here.
Yeah, and
ahead.
like as like you're at like Germany and like Sweden and Finland and stuff like it's like at like the light colors, and then as like you're going away from those, it starts getting like to the darker. That is what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good observation. And so I'm not a great what's the word, geographer when it comes to Europe. Germany, I think the border of Germany is around here, and so it's not to say that all of Germany has, you know, this light and mixed predominant. It's only northern Germany, right? So the only northern part of Germany that has it, whereas the more southern parts of Germany has more dark than light mix. And again, this is talking about the pigment of hair and eyes. It's not even talking about anything else. Why are we talking about Germany? Why does Germany matter?
Because a lot of the Nazi movement was based on kind of like the superior race, and what that would also like look like physically. So
Yeah.
like blonde hair, blue eyes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So in the early 20th century, there was this movement that basically said the lighter your physical characteristics, including your hair, including your eyes, and of course, including your skin, but not just your skin, right? These obvious eugenic characteristics, that determines the caste system, basically, right? The lighter your skin, the lighter your eyes, the lighter your hair, the higher, the more noble your race is, the higher in the caste system you go. And again, if you look carefully, it's really Northern Europeans. So Sweden, Norway, we could call it Scandinavia, right? These are the areas, the blonde hair, blue eye, these are the areas that are being celebrated as the most noble, right? If you go to the very south, you know, it's sort of ironic that the southern parts of Italy are being discriminated against here. We've got Greece and Turkey. We've got Spain and Portugal. All of these areas are deemed kind of, you know, the lower part of the system. And it's ironic because, of course, the Germans and the Italians teamed up in World War II. So it goes to show, you know, even these eugenic principles are not always going to be rock solid. But it's a book by Carlton Kuhn. He was an anthropologist. This is sort of the dark side of anthropology, is a lot of anthropology 100 years ago was going around the world and measuring their eyes and measuring their noses and measuring their skulls and judging their colors and all this sort of bullshit. It was basically studying something almost like eugenics, right? It was just studying peoples based on their physical characteristics. And the date of 1939 is important, right? What was happening in 1939? Again, that's when this book came out, but what was happening in 1939?
World War?
Yeah, World War II was just getting started. Americans got involved in Pearl Harbor's 1941, so shortly after that. So yeah, things, you know, the Nazi Party was at really just the height of its power. And so this was a national movement, right? The fact that this American anthropologist was writing about these things goes to show we can blame Hitler, and we should blame Hitler, but he's not alone in this way of thinking.
Eugenics was and kind of still is a lot in medicine,
Mm-hmm.
especially for example, like I mean, a lot of things kind of like one of the biggest, and it almost is still present today, is that people say like, oh, Black women can endure pain more than white women, so especially in like gynecology. A lot of women had to suffer through, like Black women had to suffer through more pain labor, like because they were treated kind of as they could go through more pain, you know. And it still is something that's present in medicine, and I think anthropology a little bit. Like I had heard about how people have said like, well, some of your traits, like how long your nose is, those kind of things, they come from your ancestors and your race. But it's kind of like a confusing topic, because part of it is, it's kind of true, but a lot of it kind of has like eugenics like intertwined, I guess, like
Well, what you're highlighting is, well, you're highlighting a few things, but one thing that you're highlighting is we live in a time where we want to use biology to explain how we are and the differences between people. We want to use things like genetics, right? And we can say that person has good genes and that person has bad genes. And, you know, one example to bring it back to medicine is the coronavirus, right? Is that Black and brown people have disproportionately been contracting the coronavirus. And so there's a temptation to say, oh, it must be genetics, right? Have you guys heard conversations about this sort of thing?
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if we put genetics aside, because of course that is not the case, right? Genetics do not determine how susceptible you are to a disease. In fact, genetically speaking, again, I'm not an expert of these things, but I did take biology classes as an undergraduate. We are 99.9% the same, right? When it comes to genetics, obviously the genes that produce things like eye color and whatever might be a little bit different, but almost everything is the same. Our immune systems are the same, our organs are the same, everything that happens within our bodies are the same. So genetically speaking, there is one race, the human race, right? So never associate genetic differences with racial differences. That is always going to be wrong. So how do we explain it then? Why are Black and brown people disproportionately getting the virus more? If it's not genetics, what would it be?
The care, maybe,
Care? Yeah, can you say more?
like the care that they receive, you know.
I think it's also sorry, Simone, were you done? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think it's also like location, like where you are, you know what I mean? Because it's like, for example, in the Bronx, that's where like coronavirus was so prominent, and that's where a lot of people of color live. And I feel that if it was like a white neighborhood, like White Plains or Westchester or something like that, care would be, like you were saying, Simone, more prevalent, and that way people wouldn't be contracting it as often as compared to those in lower income neighborhoods. So I think that apart from like genetics, I think it's also just where you are and where you live, and depending on how well of care you get and how much of a priority it is to get that community safe and have them be safe, because clearly lower income neighborhoods have and probably will never be a priority to this government.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. So and Mario's saying similar comments in the chat. So a part of it is care, part of it is where people live, part of it is what jobs people have, right? When we think about the caste system in America, right, the separation of people based on race, but also just based on kind of what bracket you're born into, so to speak, right? This idea of caste, where we're sort of stuck in a certain place. There's a sense of certain people should be doing certain jobs, right? So like I went to the deli to get a sandwich for lunch today. A lot of the time it is Black and brown people working at the deli. I don't know why that is, but that is something that tends to happen in America. And I'm not here to explain the complex social economic dynamics that lead this to happen, but even on a snow day, even in a pandemic, there it is, right? That is something that is happening right now. So when we think who are the frontline care workers, the essential workers that are being saluted as heroes, often it is Black and brown people, right? People of color who are put in these dangerous situations, who might have to ride on the bus, who might have to ride on the subway, whereas people like, I don't know, myself, I can teach from the safety and comfort of my own home, although I guess I do have to, teach in person. We wear masks and try to be careful about it. But in the end, we're exposing ourselves to. So it really it forces us to look at the social dynamics, why certain kinds of people, certain castes, we could say, are being put into these situations. And this really highlights what we're trying to talk about here. Race is seen as biological, right? We often look at race as your genes, this is your biology. It's incorrect to think about it that way, but it's the legacy of eugenics. And just like Simone was saying, this is something that is still with us today. Whereas caste, we can more easily say this is a social construct. Race is also a social construct. So just to make this very clear, race is also a social construct. But because there is some sort of visual component to it, it feels like it's natural, right? It's part of the laws of nature, something like that. But when we talk about caste, it draws our attention to the fact that we make this system. This is a product of choices that people have made and continue to make about who gets hired in what position and what opportunities are available to people. Isa brought up education at the top of the class. What sort of education do people have? What sort of educational opportunities do people have? And the sum total of this means that Black and brown people are being exposed to this virus more than those who can work from home. And that's just a fact, right? There's been a great divide in our society between those who can work on a computer from home and those who can't. And I don't mean to say that the virus has been a walk in the park for all of us who are stuck at home. I'm tearing my hair out, right? I'm going crazy. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily being exposed to the virus on a daily basis. So how does that sound? Do you feel better about the difference between race and caste? Would you guys be able to put it in your own words? Yeah, you want to give it a try? I feel like you're the one who's been grappling with this the most obviously to me. What do you think? What's the difference?
I mean, I'm still a little bit unclear, but I think that if I was to like read the forum and or the question for the forum, I could kind of articulate some things based on everything we talked about. I'm still just having trouble on like, I don't know if we're looking for like an exact definition on caste versus race. So I'm not too sure, and I'm just being honest right now.
Well, I appreciate your honesty, and you don't have to engage that question. You can. I would be curious to hear your thoughts, right? Because if this is something you care about, then it could be kind of illuminating for you and for me. But really the question is, once we see caste as a social construct, as something that we make as a society, we can think, what is the role of religion in this process of creation? And so, again, you could bring in race and talk about that. But race has this flavor of being natural, right? It's something you're born as, there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas caste, again, brings our attention to the fact that these are things that we can make, that we have made, in fact. Okay, why don't we keep going through the pillars of caste? We talked about divine will and caste in scripture. What were some examples of that, of caste in scripture? We looked at two different scriptures, right? One was the Rig Veda, the hymn of man, Purusha, remember that? And then one was the Bible, Noah and Ham, right? Can anybody tell me either of these stories?
And Noah's Ark. And is that the one in the Bible?
the one in the Bible, but this isn't the story of the ark though. This is after the ark. So the ark happened. There's the big flooding. Everybody is gone. All you've got is Noah and his family, and one of his children is Ham, and he curses Ham. Why does he curse Ham?
Because he walked in on him drunk and left him alone, but his brothers walked in and helped him.
Right. Yeah, the reasoning is a little bit strange, but he was drunk and he was naked, and Ham did not clothe him and did not help him. So Noah cursed Ham, and he cursed his descendants. And so what was the curse?
All his descendants will be slaves.
Yes, exactly. So people looked back at this story and said, look, it's in the Bible, slaves, right? These people are slaves, and that's what they're supposed to be. And so again, this idea, just like race, it's just the way you are. If you look carefully at race, there are a lot of people kind of on the blurry side, right? It's like, is that person black? Is that person white? Maybe you've heard of, what are their names? People who impersonate black people, but they're actually white, you know? What was the woman?
Blackface.
Well, blackface is another thing, but there's a woman,
I think it's called blackfishing.
Is there a term for it now? Maybe there.
This is all just things I've learned on the internet. Like,
well, so I forget the woman's name, but there's a high-profile case in the academic world where this matters actually kind of a lot, because there's a sense that if you are a person of color, you will have more opportunities in terms of employment and in terms of being on panels and stuff. There are panels that are all white men, then people push against that and they say, hey, that's a manel and that sort of thing. And so there was a woman who was impersonating people of color and basically saying things that were untrue, saying she grew up in the hood and she did not grow up in the hood. She grew up in Kansas or something like that.
I think I pulled it up. Jessica Krug or Krug.
Yeah, Jessica Krug is the one I was thinking of. And even before her, there was yet another example of a non-academic woman who was impersonating people of color as well. And so I think one lesson you can take away from this is race is not always obvious, right? You can't always tell what race somebody is. You know, I spent a lot of time in China. You can't always tell, is this person Chinese? Are they Tibetan? Are they Mongolian? Are they Hui? Are they something else, right? There's actually quite a bit of blurriness between these different categories. And so even though there's a sense that these things are natural, they're predefined, there's nothing you can do about it, in reality, there's a lot of blurriness, right? And some people even sort of jump across the border and pretend like they're on one side that perhaps they don't belong. Okay, so hopefully this divine will, right, coming back to the scriptures should be pretty clear. This idea of caste being natural or presented as if it were natural, hopefully that's pretty clear. What about heritability? What does that mean? How is caste heritable? How does somebody inherit caste?
Because can't you like not move up and down in caste, so it's like inherited? Like I think the dad is the one who continues that, like it determines what caste you're in.
So that's an interesting point. In most societies, that is the case, right? So if I'm a wealthy landowner and I have some children, then my children will take my name, right? And that is, again, kind of an old patriarchal system, is that women and children take the name of the father of the family. And so there is a sense that they inherit, you know, what I am and what I have, right? But in the case of enslaved people in America, they sort of flip that on their head. Are you guys aware of this? That the children would inherit the caste of the mother. Now, why do you think that is? Why is that part of the caste system in America? So I'll write this out as you think about it. In America, the children of enslaved people take the caste of their mother instead of their father. Why?
I have a question that doesn't have that is not related to this question specifically. It's that the divine will and the laws of nature, that is referred to as caste in scripture, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
perfect.
how is slavery divine will? Well, it's in the Bible, right? Noah cursed Ham and the descendants of Ham, and so therefore slavery is divinely predicted, right? It's in the Bible, and therefore it has to be the truth, right? And then we can take that to the laws of nature and say it's biology, it's eugenics, it's science, and therefore it is the truth. And so there is this weight that is put on caste, where again Wilkerson is trying to take that away and say, no, actually these are all inventions that, you know, as the academic person Krug shows, you can actually try to take these on even if you are not, you know, of that race. All right, so coming back to this question, this is actually an important point. It's sort of a horrible point, and I don't want to traumatize people. Maybe I can give a content warning right now. Anybody have an answer to this? Why are the children of enslaved people, why do they take the caste of their mother instead of their father? Does anybody know the story of Thomas Jefferson and his children, the third president of the United States?
Didn't he have kids with one of his slaves or something?
He did, yeah. It's actually even more insidious than that. So again, this is the founder of my school, right? So like when I was an undergraduate, people were like singing his praises about how great Thomas Jefferson is. Monticello, the back of the nickel, right? Look at the back of a nickel and you will see his house. That's in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so his wife, who was a white woman, died relatively young. And so it's sort of a complicated thing. His father-in-law, the father of his wife, who died relatively young, also had children with one of his enslaved people, right? He had children with a black woman who was enslaved on his property. The child of his father-in-law is a half black woman who belongs to his father-in-law and then ultimately belongs to him. He has children with her. Her name is Sally Hemings. So she was a black woman. She was much younger than Thomas Jefferson. Again, you can look this up. I don't want to horrify people, but you know, there's a word to describe that relationship, and let's just say it is not love, right? It is not a liberatory kind of love. And so why is this the case? Is because slave masters would create more slaves with their enslaved mothers. And if the children inherited the caste of the father, which again, in Europe and in most circumstances is the case, for whatever reason with enslaved people, this is not the case. Here is why, right? Is because then the children will also be slaves and they can own their children, right? How horrible is this, right? Horrible things. We're almost out of time. Another term is endogamy. Do you guys go over this one? What is endogamy?
Is that like only marrying into your like your social level or?
Yes,
like,
yeah, exactly. And so if we think about it, so this is the way it's described in the reading. It's restricting marriage to people within the same caste. It's related to this idea of heritability, right? Ambedkar, he was this Dalits right movement in India in the 20th century. This is a really thought-provoking comment, right? So caste is an artificial chopping off of population into fixed and definite units, each one prevented from fusing into another through the custom of endogamy. So he's basically saying endogamy is key in caste, because once everybody starts marrying each other, we all start to look the same, we all start to share things. There is no separation between people, right? This artificial separation between populations all of a sudden disappears. So endogamy, forcing people to marry within certain groups, is a major part of maintaining differences, right? And maintaining these caste relationships. Okay, we're very much out of time. I wanted to end on this slide because I think this is important. Where do we go from here, right? Should we pretend like race and caste are not real? No, we should not, right? This has sort of been the American policy for a pretty long time, and I think it's finally coming to an end. Wilkerson gives us some tools to say caste isn't as real as people think it is, race is not as real as people think it is, and so to pretend like you know, you either have to be a racist or you have to pretend like it's not real. There's something in the middle where you can see how these systems are created. Should we burn it all down and forget about the past and just start over? No, I think we need to remember the past, right? So what do? Two things. One is on an individual level, we can be empathetic toward people. This is something we can do. We're all a little bit racist, right? Even people of color have these racist caste systems ingrained inside of them, right? And so this is something we all need to figure out together, is how to be nice to each other, how to treat each other well. The other level is on the level of systems, right? So Simone was bringing up health systems. We were talking about occupation, entitlement, punishment, all of these things, the laws, the cops, right? This summer was a moment of reckoning for the cops, right? All of these things coming together. We need to figure this out too, right? We got a lot of work to do. Like I was saying, our third president owned people. He owned his own children. What a guy. He owned his own children, right? It's heartbreaking to think about. And so we have a long way to go, but if we just ignore the past and pretend like, you know, this guy is some sort of hero, then there will be no future, right? So we got to recognize the past, see the problems for what they were, and figure out how to move forward. So that is my piece of advice. We're totally out of time. Any last thoughts on things? How you guys feeling?